They thought she was defenseless. They thought cornering her in that stairwell would be just another day of easy intimidation. But what happened next would leave the entire school talking for months and change everything these bullies thought they knew about picking on the quiet girl. Maya Chen had perfected the art of being invisible. At 17, she moved through the crowded hallways of Jefferson High School like a shadow, her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes focused on the worn linoleum tiles beneath her feet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Her backpack, heavy with textbooks and notebooks, seemed to weigh her down both physically and metaphorically as she navigated between classes with the practiced ease of someone who had learned that the best defense was simply not being noticed. Jefferson High was the kind of urban school where survival meant understanding the complex social ecosystem that governed every interaction. It was a place where your status could be determined by everything from the brand of sneakers you wore to the neighborhood you lived in, and Maya had learned early that her particular combination of circumstances made her a target for those who fed on perceived weakness. She was one of the few Asian students in a school that was predominantly Black and Latino, which already made her stand out in ways she didn't want to. Her family had moved to the Riverside district 2 years ago, when her father's job as a maintenance supervisor at the local community college had transferred him there. The move had been meant to provide better opportunities, but for Maya, it had simply meant learning to navigate a new set of social dynamics while trying to keep her head down and focus on her studies. The Riverside neighborhood was rough around the edges, the kind of place where sirens were as common as car horns, and where the corner stores had bulletproof glass protecting the cashiers. Maya's family lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, above a laundromat, the constant hum of washing machines and dryers providing a soundtrack to her daily life. Her mother worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide, while her father pulled extra hours doing maintenance work wherever he could find it. Money was tight, and Maya understood that her education was her ticket to something better. But surviving high school required more than just academic focus. It required understanding who held power, who could be trusted, and most importantly, who should be avoided at all costs. Maya had learned these lessons through careful observation and a few painful early experiences that had taught her the value of invisibility. Her strategy was simple: dress plainly, speak quietly when spoken to, excel in her classes without drawing attention to her achievements, and above all, never give anyone a reason to see her as a threat or a challenge. She wore the same rotation of simple jeans and modest tops, kept her long black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and avoided any accessories or behaviors that might make her stand out. In her classes, Maya was the student who always had the right answer but rarely raised her hand unless specifically called upon. Teachers appreciated her diligence and consistency, but she was careful never to outshine her classmates in ways that might breed resentment. She had learned that being too smart, too eager, or too different could make you a target just as easily as being weak or vulnerable. The irony was that Maya Chen was anything but weak. 3 nights a week, she took 2 buses across town to Rodriguez Mixed Martial Arts, a gym tucked away in an industrial district where the rent was cheap and the training was serious. She had been training there for almost 4 years now, ever since her family had moved from their previous neighborhood, after an incident that had changed everything about how Maya viewed the world. The gym was her sanctuary, the one place where she could shed the careful mask of vulnerability she wore at school and become who she really was. Under the guidance of Coach Elena Rodriguez, a former professional fighter who had opened the gym after a career-ending injury, Maya had transformed herself from a scared 14-year-old into a skilled martial artist with a deep understanding of multiple fighting disciplines. Elena Rodriguez was everything Maya wished she could be at school: confident, respected, and absolutely unafraid of anyone or anything. She was a compact woman in her early 40s with graying hair that she kept in a tight bun and arms that bore the scars of countless training sessions and professional fights. Elena had taken Maya under her wing from the very first day, recognizing something in the quiet teenager that others missed. The gym itself was a world away from the polished fitness centers that catered to suburban professionals. The floors were concrete, the walls were lined with heavy bags that had seen decades of use, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat, determination, and the rubber mats that covered the sparring area. It was a place where pretense was stripped away and what mattered was heart, discipline, and the willingness to push yourself beyond what you thought was possible. Maya's training regimen was intense and comprehensive. She studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, learning the ground game techniques that could neutralize opponents regardless of size or strength. She practiced Muay Thai, developing devastating kicks and knee strikes that could end a fight in seconds. She worked on her boxing, perfecting the hand combinations and footwork that formed the foundation of striking arts. And she trained in wrestling, learning how to control distance, take opponents down, and dominate from superior positions. But perhaps most importantly, Elena taught Maya about the mental aspects of martial arts. She learned about situational awareness, about reading body language, and recognizing threats before they materialized. She studied the psychology of confrontation, understanding how most bullies operated on bluff and intimidation rather than actual skill or courage. Elena taught her that true strength came not from the ability to hurt others, but from the confidence that came with knowing you could defend yourself if necessary. The training was grueling. Maya's days began at 5:30 in the morning with a run through the neighborhood, followed by bodyweight exercises in her small bedroom before getting ready for school. After classes, she would do homework until her mother got home from work, help with dinner and household chores, and then make the hour-long bus journey to the gym. Training sessions ran from 7 to 9 in the evening, followed by another hour-long journey home, where she would shower, finish any remaining homework, and fall into bed exhausted but satisfied. The physical transformation had been gradual but profound. Maya's body had developed lean muscle and incredible conditioning. Her reflexes had become lightning fast, her balance perfect, and her understanding of leverage and technique sophisticated enough to handle opponents much larger and stronger than herself. She could throw combinations of punches that would stagger experienced fighters, execute takedowns that would leave heavyweight wrestlers on their backs, and transition between ground positions with the fluidity of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting every movement. But the mental transformation was even more significant. The scared, uncertain girl who had first walked into Rodriguez's MMA had been replaced by someone who understood her own capabilities and carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from genuine preparedness. Maya knew she could handle herself in any physical confrontation, which paradoxically made her less likely to seek out or escalate conflicts. Elena had drilled into her students the importance of martial arts ethics. Fighting was a last resort, to be used only when all other options had been exhausted and when you or someone you cared about was in genuine danger. The goal was always to avoid confrontation through awareness, de-escalation, and strategic thinking. But if fighting became unavoidable, Elena taught her students to end it quickly and decisively. Maya had internalized these lessons completely. At school, she used her enhanced awareness to avoid potential problems before they developed. She could read the social dynamics of any situation, identify the key players, and position herself to stay out of harm's way. Her improved confidence had subtle effects on how she carried herself, but she was careful to maintain the appearance of vulnerability that kept her safe from unwanted attention. The contradiction of her existence was something Maya had learned to live with. At school, she was Maya, the quiet, studious girl who kept to herself and never caused trouble. At the gym, she was Maya the fighter, someone who could hold her own against training partners who outweighed her by 50 pounds and had years more experience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The two versions of herself seemed to exist in completely separate worlds, and Maya had become skilled at switching between them as needed. Her training partners at the gym knew her as someone who brought intensity and focus to every session. She was respectful to her instructors and supportive of newer students, but when it came time to spar, she was relentless in her pursuit of improvement. Elena often used Maya as an example of what could be achieved through consistent training and dedication, pointing out how she had developed from a nervous beginner into someone who could compete with the gym's most advanced students. The other fighters respected Maya's work ethic and skill, but they also understood that she lived a double life. None of them attended Jefferson High, and Maya had never shared the details of her school experience with them. Elena suspected that Maya was dealing with more than just typical teenage challenges, but she respected her students' privacy while making it clear that she was available if Maya ever needed to talk or needed help with anything. Maya's parents knew she trained at the gym, but they didn't fully understand the extent of her skills or the intensity of her commitment. They saw it as a healthy activity that kept her busy and out of trouble, which was enough for them given their demanding work schedules. Maya's mother sometimes worried about the bruises and occasional black eyes that came from sparring sessions, but Maya assured her that proper protective gear and careful supervision made the training safe. The truth was that Maya's parents had their own struggles and challenges that took most of their attention. Her father was dealing with the stress of keeping his job in an environment where budget cuts and layoffs were constant threats. Her mother was working exhausting hours to make ends meet, while dealing with the emotional toll of her job at the hospital. They trusted Maya to make good decisions and appreciated that she was staying out of trouble and keeping her grades up, which was more than they could say for many of their neighbors' children. Maya's academic performance was another area where she had to carefully balance excellence with invisibility. She was naturally intelligent and had always been a good student, but she had learned to moderate her achievements to avoid unwanted attention. She aimed for A's and B's, participated in class discussions when called upon, and completed all her assignments on time, but she avoided joining academic competitions or honor societies that might make her stand out. Her teachers generally liked Maya and appreciated her consistent performance and respectful attitude. She was the kind of student who made their jobs easier, prepared, engaged, and never disruptive, but most of them saw her as a quiet, well-behaved student, rather than recognizing the intelligence and potential that lay beneath her carefully constructed facade. Maya's social life at school was limited but intentional. She had a few acquaintances among her classmates, mostly other students who shared her preference for keeping a low profile. She was friendly when approached, helpful when asked for assistance with homework, and generally well regarded by those who knew her. But she avoided forming close friendships that might complicate her ability to maintain her double life, or that might put other students at risk if her carefully maintained invisibility ever failed. The gym had become Maya's primary social outlet, the place where she could form genuine connections with people who shared her interests and values. Her training partners ranged from teenagers like herself to adults in their 30s and 40s, all united by their commitment to martial arts and their respect for the discipline and focus that Elena demanded. These relationships were built on mutual respect and shared experience rather than the superficial considerations that seemed to dominate high school social dynamics. Maya's daily routine had become a carefully orchestrated balance between her two worlds. She would wake up early for her morning run, the quiet streets of Riverside providing a peaceful start to her day. The exercise helped her stay in fighting shape, while also serving as a form of meditation that prepared her mentally for the challenges ahead. She would return home, shower, and help her mother prepare breakfast before catching the bus to school. The bus ride to Jefferson High was always an exercise in awareness and positioning. Maya would choose seats that gave her good visibility of the entire bus while keeping her back protected. She would observe her fellow passengers, noting who got on and off at each stop, tracking the social dynamics and potential conflicts that might develop. She kept her earbuds in and her eyes focused on her phone or a book, projecting an image of someone who was completely absorbed in her own world and not worth bothering. At school, Maya moved through her classes with the same careful attention to her surroundings. She knew which hallways were more likely to be sites of confrontation, which teachers were more effective at maintaining order, and which students were potential sources of trouble. She had mapped out multiple routes between her classes and identified safe spaces where she could retreat if necessary. Her locker was positioned in a well-trafficked area where witnesses would be present if anyone tried to cause problems. Maya's lunch periods were spent in the library, where she could eat quietly while working on homework or reading. The library was supervised by Ms. Patterson, a no-nonsense librarian who maintained strict rules about behavior and noise levels. It was one of the few places in the school where Maya felt genuinely safe, surrounded by books, and overseen by an adult who wouldn't tolerate any kind of disruption. After school, Maya would catch the bus home, help with household chores, and focus on her homework until it was time to leave for the gym. The transition from school Maya to fighter Maya happened during the bus ride across town, as she mentally prepared herself for the intensity of training while leaving behind the stress and caution of her school day. The gym sessions were where Maya could truly be herself. She would change into her training gear, bow to her instructors, and immerse herself completely in the physical and mental challenges of martial arts. The repetitive nature of practicing techniques, the intensity of sparring sessions, and the camaraderie of training partners who pushed each other to improve created an environment where Maya could forget about the careful game she played at school and focus entirely on becoming the best fighter she could be. Elena had noticed that Maya seemed to carry tension from her life outside the gym, and she often used training as a way to help her student work through whatever challenges she was facing. The physical exertion of hitting heavy bags, the mental focus required for technique work, and the confidence that came from successful sparring sessions all contributed to Maya's ability to handle stress and maintain her composure in difficult situations. Maya's skill development had progressed to the point where Elena was encouraging her to consider competing in amateur tournaments. Maya had the technical ability, the conditioning, and the mental toughness to succeed at a high level, but she was reluctant to pursue competition because it would require a level of visibility and attention that conflicted with her strategy of remaining invisible at school. The internal conflict between her two identities was something Maya struggled with daily. Part of her wanted to embrace her abilities and achievements, to let people see who she really was beneath the careful facade. But her survival instincts, honed through years of navigating challenging environments, told her that invisibility was still her best protection. She had seen what happened to students who stood out for any reason, and she wasn't willing to risk the safety and stability she had worked so hard to achieve. Maya's relationship with her parents was complicated by her double life. She loved them deeply and appreciated the sacrifices they made to provide for the family, but she also felt the weight of protecting them from the realities of her school experience. She didn't want them to worry about her safety or feel like they had made a mistake by moving to Riverside. She wanted them to focus on their own challenges and trust that she could handle her own problems. The financial strain of her training was something Maya was acutely aware of. The gym membership, equipment, and transportation costs were a significant expense for her family, and she felt the responsibility to make the most of the opportunity her parents were providing. She had taken a part-time job at a local grocery store to help cover some of her expenses, working weekends and holidays to earn money while maintaining her training schedule and academic performance. Maya's work ethic and time management skills had become extraordinary out of necessity. She had learned to maximize every minute of her day, completing homework during breaks at work, studying during bus rides, and using her physical training to maintain her energy and focus. She had developed systems for everything from meal preparation to equipment maintenance, ensuring that she could maintain her demanding schedule without compromising any aspect of her responsibilities. The grocery store job had also provided Maya with additional insights into human behavior and social dynamics. She observed customers from all walks of life, learning to read people's moods and intentions while providing friendly, professional service. The skills she had developed in martial arts, particularly situational awareness and the ability to remain calm under pressure, served her well in dealing with difficult customers and stressful situations. Maya's co-workers at the grocery store saw her as a reliable, hard-working teenager who was always willing to help out when needed. She was punctual, efficient, and maintained a positive attitude even during busy periods or when dealing with challenging customers. Her manager appreciated her dependability and had offered her additional hours, but Maya had to carefully balance her work schedule with her training and academic commitments. The money Maya earned from her job provided her with a small degree of independence and helped reduce the financial burden on her family. She used her earnings to pay for her gym membership, buy training equipment, and contribute to household expenses when possible. The experience of earning her own money had given her a greater appreciation for the value of hard work and had reinforced her determination to succeed academically so that she could eventually provide better opportunities for her family. Maya's typical day was a carefully orchestrated balance of responsibilities and activities. She would wake up at 5:30, complete her morning run and exercises, help with breakfast, and catch the bus to school. Her classes required her full attention and participation, but she remained constantly aware of her surroundings and the social dynamics that might affect her safety. Lunch was spent in the library, after-school time was devoted to homework and household responsibilities, and evenings were dedicated to training at the gym. The weekend schedule was equally demanding, with longer training sessions on Saturday mornings, work shifts at the grocery store, and time devoted to catching up on homework and helping with household chores. Sunday was her only day off from training, which she used for rest, family time, and preparation for the coming week. Even her rest days required careful planning to ensure she was ready for the physical and mental demands of her regular schedule. Maya's social media presence was minimal and carefully curated. She maintained accounts on the major platforms, but shared very little personal information and avoided posting anything that might reveal her martial arts training or create unwanted attention. She used social media primarily to stay connected with her training partners and to follow martial arts instructors and fighters who inspired her development. The contrast between Maya's online presence and her real life was stark. Her social media showed a typical teenager who enjoyed spending time with friends, working part-time, and focusing on her studies. There were no photos from the gym, no references to her fighting skills, and no indication that she was anything other than a quiet, studious student who kept to herself. Maya's bedroom reflected the same careful balance between her two identities. Her martial arts trophies and belt certifications were displayed discreetly on a shelf that wasn't visible from the doorway. Her training gear was stored in a closet, and her fight videos and technique study materials were kept on a password-protected laptop. To anyone casually observing her living space, it would appear to belong to a typical high school student focused on academics and part-time work. The physical demands of Maya's lifestyle had required her to develop exceptional nutritional and recovery practices. She planned her meals carefully to support her training while staying within the family's budget constraints. She had learned about proper hydration, sleep optimization, and injury prevention through both Elena's instruction and her own research. Her commitment to maintaining peak physical condition was absolute, as she understood that her safety and success depended on her ability to perform when it mattered most. Maya's mental preparation was equally rigorous. She practiced visualization techniques, imagining various scenarios and her responses to them. She studied psychology and conflict resolution, understanding that avoiding fights was always preferable to winning them. She developed meditation practices that helped her maintain focus and emotional control under pressure. Elena had taught her that the mind was the most important weapon in any fighter's arsenal, and Maya had embraced this philosophy completely. The transformation Maya had undergone since beginning her martial arts training was profound, but largely invisible to her classmates and teachers. She carried herself with subtle confidence, her movements were more fluid and purposeful, and her awareness of her surroundings was heightened to an almost supernatural level. But these changes were integrated into her persona as the quiet, studious student who kept to herself and never caused trouble. Maya's understanding of violence and conflict had evolved far beyond what most teenagers ever experienced. She had studied the mechanics of fighting, the psychology of aggression, and the legal and ethical implications of self-defense. She understood that violence was a tool to be used only when all other options had been exhausted, and that the goal was always to end conflicts as quickly and safely as possible. This knowledge gave her a unique perspective on the casual aggression and posturing that characterized much of high school social dynamics. The respect Maya had earned at the gym was based on genuine achievement and demonstrated skill. Her training partners knew that she could handle herself in any situation, and they treated her as an equal despite her age and size. This respect was something Maya treasured, as it was based on merit rather than social position or family background. It represented the kind of recognition she hoped to achieve in other areas of her life through hard work and dedication. Maya's long-term goals were shaped by her dual identity and her experiences navigating challenging environments. She wanted to continue her education, possibly studying psychology or criminal justice, while maintaining her martial arts training and eventually competing at higher levels. She dreamed of using her skills and knowledge to help other young people who found themselves in difficult situations, perhaps by teaching martial arts or working in youth counseling. The pressure of maintaining her double life was something Maya felt constantly, but she had developed coping strategies that helped her manage the stress. Her training provided a physical outlet for tension and frustration, while her academic focus gave her a sense of purpose and direction for the future. She had learned to compartmentalize her experiences, dealing with school challenges during school hours and focusing on her development as a martial artist during training time. Maya's relationship with Elena had evolved into something approaching mentorship, with the older woman providing guidance that extended far beyond martial arts technique. Elena had recognized Maya's potential early on and had taken a special interest in her development, both as a fighter and as a person. She provided advice on everything from nutrition and training to academic planning and career choices, always emphasizing the importance of discipline, respect, and personal responsibility. The gym had become Maya's second home, the place where she felt most comfortable and authentic. She had keys to the building and was trusted to open early for her morning training sessions when Elena had other commitments. The responsibility was something Maya took seriously, as it represented the trust and respect she had earned through years of consistent effort and dedication. Maya's training schedule had intensified as her skills developed, with Elena introducing more advanced techniques and concepts that required greater focus and commitment. She was learning to teach newer students, which helped reinforce her own knowledge while developing her communication and leadership skills. The experience of helping others learn martial arts gave Maya a glimpse of what her future might hold if she chose to pursue coaching or instruction as a career path. The financial reality of Maya's situation was always present in her decision-making. She understood that her family's resources were limited, and that every dollar spent on her training represented a sacrifice by her parents. This knowledge motivated her to make the most of every opportunity and to never take her training for granted. She had learned to maintain her equipment carefully, to avoid unnecessary expenses, and to contribute to the household income whenever possible. Maya's academic performance remained strong. Despite the demands of her training schedule and part-time work, she had developed exceptional time management skills and had learned to study efficiently, focusing on the most important concepts and using her enhanced mental discipline to retain information more effectively. Her teachers continued to view her as a reliable, hard-working student who rarely caused problems and consistently met expectations. The social dynamics at Jefferson High continued to evolve around Maya without her active participation. She observed the shifting alliances, the emerging conflicts, and the changing power structures that characterized teenage social hierarchies. Her enhanced awareness allowed her to predict and avoid potential problems, but she remained committed to her strategy of invisibility and non-engagement. Maya's understanding of herself had deepened through her martial arts training and her experiences balancing multiple responsibilities. She had developed a strong sense of personal identity that was independent of external validation or social acceptance. She knew who she was, what she was capable of, and what she valued most. This self-knowledge gave her a stability and confidence that was rare among her peers. The contradiction between Maya's capabilities and her chosen presentation continued to define her daily experience. She possessed skills that would have commanded respect and admiration if revealed, but she chose to keep them hidden in service of a larger strategy for survival and success. This sacrifice was something she made willingly, understanding that temporary invisibility was a small price to pay for long-term safety and opportunity. Maya's story was one of deliberate choice and careful calculation, of a young woman who had found strength in unexpected places and had learned to use that strength wisely. She had created a life that balanced multiple identities and responsibilities while maintaining her focus on the goals that mattered most to her. But, as she would soon discover, even the most carefully constructed facades could not protect against every possible threat. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything Maya had learned and force her to choose between the safety of invisibility and the necessity of revealing her true capabilities. In the complex ecosystem of Jefferson High School, where power dynamics shifted daily and violence was always just beneath the surface, Maya Chen was about to discover that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from hiding who you are, but from having the courage to show the world what you're truly capable of when pushed too far. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in late October when Maya noticed 3 students lingering near her locker longer than usual. She had developed an instinct for reading the subtle signs of brewing conflict, and something about their positioning and body language triggered her internal warning system. They weren't just hanging out. They were waiting for something or someone. Jasmine Rodriguez was the undisputed queen of Jefferson High's social hierarchy, a senior who commanded respect through a combination of natural charisma, fierce loyalty to her friends, and an absolutely ruthless approach to anyone who crossed her. She was tall and striking, with perfectly styled hair and an extensive collection of designer accessories that somehow never violated the school's dress code. Her influence extended far beyond her immediate circle of friends, reaching into every corner of the school's social ecosystem. Jasmine had built her reputation on being untouchable. She dated the star basketball player, maintained a 3.5 GPA despite rarely appearing to study, and had never been successfully challenged by anyone in her 4 years at Jefferson. Teachers treated her with the kind of cautious respect reserved for students whose parents had influence in the district, and administrators went out of their way to avoid conflicts with her or her inner circle. Standing beside Jasmine was Deshaun Williams, a junior who had earned his place in her orbit through a combination of athletic ability and unwavering loyalty. He was compact but muscular, with the kind of confidence that came from never having lost a fight and never expecting to. Deshawn served as Jasmine's enforcer, the one who handled problems that required a more direct approach than social manipulation could provide. His reputation for quick violence had kept most potential challengers at bay. The third member of their group was Keisha Thompson, a sophomore who had attached herself to Jasmine's crew through a mixture of desperation and cunning. She was smaller than the others, but made up for it with a vicious tongue and an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone's secrets and weaknesses. Keisha understood that information was power, and she had made herself indispensable by becoming Jasmine's primary source of intelligence about what was happening throughout the school. Maya had successfully avoided their attention for almost 2 full years, but she knew that her luck couldn't last forever. Jefferson High was too small for anyone to remain completely invisible, and her consistent academic performance and mysterious family situation had apparently attracted the kind of scrutiny she had worked so hard to avoid. The fact that they were positioned near her locker suggested that her careful strategy of remaining beneath notice had finally failed. The morning routine that had served Maya so well suddenly felt inadequate as she approached her locker with growing awareness that she was walking into a trap. Her training had taught her to assess threats quickly and accurately, and everything about this situation screamed danger. Jasmine's crew wasn't known for casual conversations or friendly introductions. When they focused their attention on someone, it was usually because they had identified a target. Maya's first instinct was to turn around and find an alternative route to her first class, but she knew that running would only delay the inevitable confrontation while making her appear weak and afraid. Elena had taught her that retreat was sometimes the wisest option, but it had to be strategic rather than reactive. Random avoidance would only make her seem like easier prey to predators who thrived on fear and uncertainty. Instead, Maya continued walking toward her locker while mentally preparing for multiple scenarios. She cataloged the positions of all 3 students, noted the escape routes available to her, and assessed the likelihood of intervention from teachers or security guards. The hallway was moderately crowded with students preparing for first period, which meant there would be witnesses to whatever was about to happen. "Maya Chen," Jasmine said as she approached, her voice carrying the kind of false friendliness that immediately put Maya on high alert. "We need to talk." Maya stopped 3 feet away from her locker, maintaining enough distance to react if the situation escalated while appearing compliant with Jasmine's request. Her posture remained relaxed and non-threatening, but every muscle in her body was coiled and ready to respond. Years of training had taught her to mask her readiness behind a facade of calm submission. "What about?" Maya asked quietly, keeping her voice steady and her expression neutral. She had learned that showing fear or aggression would only encourage bullies to escalate their behavior, while appearing too confident might be interpreted as a challenge. The key was to project quiet compliance while remaining internally prepared for anything. Jasmine stepped closer, invading Maya's personal space in a way that was clearly designed to intimidate. "About the fact that you've been lying to everyone about who you are and where you come from. About the fact that you think you can just float through this school without anyone noticing that you don't belong here." The accusation was vague enough to be difficult to refute, while specific enough to suggest that they had been investigating her background. Maya felt her pulse quicken slightly, but she kept her breathing steady and her expression unchanged. Elena had taught her that information was a weapon, and she needed to understand exactly what they knew before deciding how to respond. "I don't know what you mean," Maya said simply, reaching for her locker combination. The movement was deliberately slow and non-threatening, but it also positioned her hands in a way that would allow her to defend herself if necessary. "I'm just trying to get to class." Deshawn moved to block her access to the locker, his bulk intimidating but his positioning sloppy in a way that revealed his lack of real training. Maya noted his stance, his balance, and the way he held his hands, automatically calculating the most effective ways to neutralize him if the situation turned physical. Her assessment was complete in seconds, but she kept her findings to herself while maintaining her submissive posture. "See, that's the problem," Keisha interjected, her voice sharp with malicious excitement. "You think you can just get to class like you're some kind of normal student. But we know you're not normal, are you, Maya? We know you're hiding something." Maya's training had prepared her for this moment, but the reality of being confronted was still stressful. She could feel the attention of other students beginning to focus on their group, and she knew that her response would determine whether this remained a minor confrontation or escalated into something much more serious. The audience was growing, and with it, the pressure on all parties to maintain their reputations. "I'm not hiding anything," Maya replied, which was technically true even if it wasn't the complete truth. "I just want to get my books and go to class. Can you please move so I can get to my locker?" The polite request was carefully calculated to make her appear reasonable and non-threatening while putting the burden of escalation on them. If they continued to block her access to her locker, they would appear to be the aggressors in front of the growing crowd of observers. Maya hoped that social pressure might be enough to diffuse the situation without requiring her to reveal any of her capabilities. Jasmine laughed, a sound that carried no warmth or humor. "Oh, you want to get to your locker? The locker that you somehow managed to get in the prime location despite being a nobody? The locker that you pay for with money that your family definitely doesn't have? That locker?" Maya realized that their investigation had been more thorough than she had initially suspected. They had clearly been watching her routines, noting her possessions, and drawing conclusions about her financial situation. The fact that they were questioning her ability to afford a premium locker location suggested that someone had been paying attention to details that most students wouldn't notice. "My family works hard for everything we have," Maya said, which was completely true, and avoided the more complex questions about how her parents had managed to secure certain advantages for her. "I don't know why you think there's something wrong with having a locker in this hallway." Deshaun stepped closer, his intimidation tactics becoming more obvious and aggressive. "Because girls like you don't get lockers in prime locations unless something shady is going down. Because girls like you don't walk around with expensive phones and designer backpacks unless they're getting money from somewhere they shouldn't be." Maya felt a flash of anger at the implications, but she controlled her reaction through the breathing techniques Elena had taught her. Getting emotional would only give them more ammunition and could lead to mistakes that might expose her training. Instead, she focused on the facts and maintained her calm demeanor. "My phone was a gift from my grandmother for my birthday," Maya said, which was partially true even if it didn't explain how her grandmother had been able to afford such an expensive gift. "My backpack is from an outlet store. I don't understand why you're making this into something it's not." Keisha moved around to Maya's side, completing what was clearly a practiced intimidation formation. "Because we don't like liars, Maya. And we especially don't like liars who think they're better than everyone else because they keep their mouths shut and get good grades." The circular logic was frustrating, but Maya recognized it as a classic bullying tactic. They were creating a no-win situation where any response could be twisted into evidence of guilt or defiance. Her best strategy was to remain calm, avoid giving them any new ammunition, and wait for an opportunity to extract herself from the situation. "I never said I was better than anyone," Maya replied quietly. "I just try to focus on my studies and stay out of trouble. I'm not looking for any problems with you or anyone else." Jasmine's eyes narrowed, and Maya could see that her non-confrontational approach was actually making the situation worse. Bullies like Jasmine thrived on fear and submission, and Maya's refusal to show either was frustrating them in ways that might lead to escalation rather than resolution. "That's the problem right there," Jasmine said, her voice rising slightly. "You think you can just stay out of trouble and ignore the fact that you're in our school, in our hallway, taking up space that belongs to people who actually matter. You think you can just float through here without acknowledging that there's a hierarchy, and you're at the bottom of it." Maya's situational awareness told her that the crowd of observers was growing and that their voices were attracting more attention. She could see several students recording the interaction with their phones, which meant that whatever happened next would be documented and shared throughout the school within minutes. The pressure to maintain reputations was increasing for all parties involved. "I respect everyone here," Maya said, trying one more time to de-escalate the situation. "I'm not trying to cause problems or disrespect anyone. I just want to get my books and go to class." Deshaun moved even closer, his chest almost touching Maya's shoulder. "But you are causing problems. You're causing problems by pretending to be something you're not. You're causing problems by not acknowledging your place. And you're causing problems by making us waste our time explaining this to you." Maya could smell his cologne and feel the heat from his body. Her training had taught her to recognize the signs of impending violence, and every indicator suggested that the situation was about to escalate beyond words. Deshaun's breathing was becoming more rapid, His muscles were tensing, and his hands were beginning to clench into fists. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Maya said, taking a small step backward to create more space, while being careful not to appear to be retreating. "I'm not trying to disrespect anyone or cause any problems. Maybe we can talk about this later when there aren't so many people around." Keisha laughed harshly. "Oh, now you want to talk privately? Now you want to work things out? After you've been ignoring us and acting like you're too good to acknowledge our existence?" Maya realized that they were creating a narrative that justified whatever they were planning to do to her. In their version of events, she was the arrogant outsider who had disrespected them and refused to recognize their authority. Any action they took would be framed as justified punishment for her transgressions. "I never ignored you," Maya said truthfully. "I just didn't think you wanted to talk to me. I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression." The apology was strategically calculated to provide them with a face-saving exit from the confrontation, while also demonstrating to the observers that she was trying to resolve the situation peacefully. Maya hoped that publicly acknowledging their concerns might satisfy their need for dominance without requiring further escalation. But Jasmine's reaction made it clear that apologies were not what she was looking for. "Oh, you're sorry? You're sorry that you've been walking around here for 2 years, acting like you're invisible? You're sorry that you've never once acknowledged the people who actually run this school?" Maya could see that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Jasmine's voice was getting louder, more students were gathering to watch, and the physical positioning of her 3 antagonists was becoming more aggressive. She began to mentally prepare for the possibility that this confrontation might require her to reveal some of her capabilities. "I'm sorry if I've done anything to offend you," Maya said, maintaining her calm tone despite the growing tension. "That was never my intention. I just try to focus on my studies and stay out of everyone's way." Deshawn stepped forward again, this time deliberately bumping into Maya's shoulder with enough force to make her stumble slightly. "But you're not staying out of our way, are you? You're right here, in our hallway, at our school, taking up space that belongs to people who actually deserve it." The physical contact was clearly intentional and represented a significant escalation. Maya's training kicked in automatically, her balance adjusting to absorb the impact while her body positioning shifted to prepare for further contact. But she forced herself to appear rattled and off balance, maintaining her facade of vulnerability while internally preparing for what might come next. "I'm not trying to take anyone's space," Maya said, allowing a slight tremor to enter her voice to suggest that she was becoming genuinely frightened. "I just want to get to class. Please, let me get my books." Jasmine moved closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Here's what's going to happen, Maya. You're going to start showing the proper respect to the people who matter at this school. You're going to acknowledge that you're nobody special and that you're here only because we allow it. And you're going to stop pretending that you're better than everyone else." Maya nodded quickly, playing the role of the intimidated victim while keeping her actual capabilities hidden. "Okay, I understand. I'm sorry if I haven't been respectful. I'll do better." But even as she spoke the words, Maya could see that her submission was not having the desired effect. Jasmine's expression was becoming more predatory, and Deshawn's posture was becoming more aggressive. They had invested too much energy in this confrontation to simply walk away satisfied with a verbal apology. "See, I don't think you really understand," Keisha said, moving to complete the circle around Maya. "I think you're just saying what you think we want to hear. I think you're still planning to go right back to acting like you're too good for everyone here." Maya found herself completely surrounded, with students continuing to gather and record the interaction. The situation was rapidly approaching a point where any movement could be interpreted as aggressive, and she was running out of options for peaceful resolution. Her training had prepared her for this moment, but she had hoped never to need those skills in a school setting. "I promise I understand," Maya said, allowing more fear to show in her voice while internally calculating the best responses to various attack scenarios. "I'll do whatever you want. I just don't want any trouble." Jasmine smiled, and Maya could see that they had reached the point where words were no longer going to be sufficient. "But you see, Maya, trouble has already found you. The question now is how much trouble you're willing to accept before you learn your lesson." The threat was clear and unmistakable. Maya realized that they had moved beyond intimidation into the realm of actual physical confrontation. Her careful strategy of remaining invisible had failed, and now she was facing the exact situation she had spent years trying to avoid. "What do you want me to do?" Maya asked, still hoping to find a solution that didn't require her to reveal her training. "I'll do whatever you want. Just tell me what you want." Deshaun cracked his knuckles, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the tension-filled hallway. "What we want is for you to understand that actions have consequences. What we want is for you to learn that you can't just ignore the people who run this school." Maya could see that the situation was about to explode into violence. Every indicator she had been trained to recognize was present. Elevated voices, aggressive body language, escalating threats, and a growing audience that was creating pressure on all parties to maintain their reputations. The confrontation had taken on a life of its own, and peaceful resolution was no longer possible. "I understand that actions have consequences," Maya said, her voice remaining steady despite the chaos building around her. "I understand that I need to be more respectful. I understand that I've made mistakes." But as she spoke, Maya was also preparing for what she knew was coming. Her weight shifted slightly to a more balanced stance, her hands moved to positions that would allow for faster defensive reactions, and her breathing deepened to prepare her body for the physical demands of combat. The transformation was subtle but complete, invisible to casual observers but representing a fundamental change in her readiness. Jasmine stepped forward one final time, her face now inches from Maya's. "I don't think you understand anything yet, but you're about to learn everything you need to know about respect and consequences." The crowd of students pressed closer, phones held high to capture whatever was about to happen. Maya could hear whispered conversations and feel the electric anticipation that preceded violence in a school setting. She had seconds to make a decision that would determine not just the outcome of this confrontation but potentially the entire trajectory of her remaining time at Jefferson High. The careful balance between her two identities was about to be shattered, and Maya Chen was about to discover whether her years of training had prepared her for the moment when hiding was no longer an option and survival required revealing exactly who she really was beneath the carefully constructed facade of vulnerability. The escalation was complete, and there was no turning back. The confrontation at Maya's locker had ended with forced smiles and hollow promises of mutual respect, but everyone involved knew it was merely the opening round of something much larger. Jasmine Rodriguez was not accustomed to being defied, even in the subtle way that Maya's calm composure represented, and she left the encounter with a burning need to understand exactly who she was dealing with. That afternoon, Jasmine sat in her usual spot in the school's courtyard, surrounded by her carefully curated circle of followers and admirers. The outdoor area had become her unofficial throne room, a place where she held court and dispensed judgment on the social dynamics that governed Jefferson High. Students would approach seeking her approval for everything from relationship decisions to weekend party invitations, and Jasmine reveled in the power that came with being the undisputed arbiter of what was acceptable. "There's something off about that girl," Jasmine announced to her assembled audience, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to having her observations treated as gospel truth. "Nobody stays that calm when they're being confronted, unless they know something we don't." Deshaun nodded enthusiastically, still nursing his wounded pride from the morning's encounter. He had been expecting Maya to break down, to beg for mercy, or at least to show some sign of the fear that usually accompanied his intimidation tactics. Instead, she had remained frustratingly composed, treating their threats as minor inconveniences rather than serious dangers. "She's definitely hiding something," he agreed, flexing his hands as if he were still ready for the physical confrontation that had been promised but not delivered. Normal people don't act like that when they're surrounded. Normal people show fear. Keisha pulled out her phone and began scrolling through social media profiles with the practiced efficiency of someone who had made information gathering into an art form. Her ability to uncover secrets and connections had made her invaluable to Jasmine's operation, and she took pride in being able to find dirt on anyone who attracted their attention. "Maya Chen," she said, reading from her screen. 17 years old, junior, lives on Riverside Avenue with her parents. Father works maintenance at the community college. Mother is a nurse's aide at General Hospital. Pretty standard working-class background, nothing that would explain why she acts like she's bulletproof. Jasmine frowned, sensing that there were pieces missing from the picture Keisha was painting. In her experience, people who projected confidence and composure usually had something substantial backing them up, whether it was family money, political connections, or personal capabilities that weren't immediately obvious. "What about extracurriculars?" Jasmine asked. "Sports teams, clubs, anything that might explain where she gets her attitude?" Keisha shook her head, still scrolling through various databases and social media platforms. "Nothing official. No sports teams, no academic clubs, no student government. According to the school records, she's basically invisible. Shows up, does her work, goes home." But Deshaun was remembering details from the morning confrontation that were beginning to bother him. Maya's posture had been unusual for someone who was supposedly intimidated. Her balance had been perfect, her movements controlled, and her breathing had remained steady throughout the encounter. These were not the characteristics of someone who was genuinely afraid. "The way she stood," he said slowly, trying to articulate something that had been nagging at him all day. "It wasn't normal. When people are scared, they either try to make themselves smaller, or they puff up to look bigger. She just stood there like she was waiting for something." Jasmine's eyes sharpened with interest. She had built her reputation on reading people accurately, and Deshaun's observation suggested that Maya's behavior had been more calculated than spontaneous. People who remained calm under pressure usually had reasons for their confidence, and those reasons were worth investigating. "What kind of waiting?" Jasmine asked. "Like she was expecting help, or like she was planning something?" Deshaun considered the question, replaying the encounter in his mind and trying to identify what had felt wrong about Maya's reactions. Her positioning had been strategic rather than random, her responses had been measured rather than emotional, and her overall demeanor had suggested someone who was accustomed to dealing with confrontational situations. "Like she was planning something," he said finally. "Like she was ready for whatever we were going to do next." The implications of this assessment were troubling for all three of them. If Maya had been prepared for their confrontation, it suggested that she either had experience dealing with similar situations or had received training that made her confident in her ability to handle physical threats. Neither possibility was comforting for people who were used to intimidating others through superior numbers and aggressive posturing. Keisha expanded her search beyond official school records and social media profiles, diving into the kind of deep background research that required more sophisticated tools and techniques. Her reputation as an information broker depended on her ability to find details that others missed, and Maya Chen was beginning to represent a professional challenge. "Wait," Keisha said, her voice taking on the excited tone that meant she had discovered something significant. "I'm finding some weird gaps in her digital footprint. Like, she has social media accounts, but they're almost too clean. No controversial posts, no dramatic friend breakups, no complaints about family or school. It's like someone scrubbed her online presence." Jasmine leaned forward, her predatory instincts fully engaged. People who maintained carefully curated online personas usually had something to hide, and the effort required to maintain such discipline suggested that Maya's secrets were more significant than a typical teenage embarrassment. "What kind of gaps?" Jasmine asked. "Missing time periods, deleted posts, inactive accounts." Keisha's fingers flew across her phone screen as she cross-referenced various databases and platforms. Her techniques for gathering information had evolved far beyond casual social media stalking, incorporating methods that bordered on actual investigation work. "It's more subtle than that," Keisha explained. "Her posts are consistent, but they're generic. Like, she never mentions specific places she goes, specific people she hangs out with, or specific activities she does outside of school. Most people can't help themselves from oversharing, but Maya's accounts read like they were written by a public relations firm." The discovery was significant because it suggested that Maya was not just naturally private, but actively working to maintain a specific image. The level of discipline required to maintain such careful control over her online presence indicated either sophisticated instruction or natural paranoia that went far beyond typical teenage concerns about privacy. Deshaun was becoming more convinced that their morning encounter had revealed only the surface of something much deeper. Maya's behavior had been too controlled, too strategic, for someone who was simply trying to avoid trouble. Her responses had suggested someone who was comfortable with confrontation, even if she preferred to avoid it. "We need to find out where she goes after school," Deshaun said. "People who act like that usually have somewhere they go to practice acting like that. Maybe she's taking self-defense classes, maybe she's involved in something we don't know about." Jasmine nodded, recognizing the wisdom of gathering more intelligence before planning their next move. If Maya had hidden resources or capabilities, it was better to discover them before committing to a course of action that might backfire spectacularly. "Can you track her movements?" Jasmine asked Keisha. "Find out what buses she takes, where she goes, who she spends time with outside of school." Keisha was already working on the problem, using a combination of social media analysis, public transportation data, and good old-fashioned detective work to map Maya's daily routines. Her skills had been developed through years of gathering intelligence on classmates, teachers, and anyone else who might be useful to Jasmine's operations. "Give me a day or two," Keisha said confidently. "I'll find out everything there is to know about Maya Chen's after-school activities." Meanwhile, Maya was completely unaware that she had become the subject of an intensive investigation. Her routine continued unchanged. Morning run, school, homework, work at the grocery store when scheduled, and training at Rodriguez MMA 3 nights a week. Her carefully constructed normal life proceeded according to plan, with no indication that her world was about to be turned upside down. At the gym that evening, Maya was working through a particularly intense training session with Elena Rodriguez. The morning's confrontation had left her with excess energy that needed to be channeled productively, and the physical demands of martial arts training provided the perfect outlet for stress and frustration. "Your form is tight tonight," Elena observed as Maya completed a series of combinations on the heavy bag. "Something bothering you?" Maya paused her training, wiping sweat from her forehead and considering how much to share with her instructor. Elena had always been supportive and understanding, but Maya was reluctant to admit that her strategy of remaining invisible at school was beginning to fail. "Just some social drama at school," Maya said finally, which was technically accurate even if it didn't capture the full scope of the situation. "Nothing I can't handle." Elena studied her student with the keen eye of someone who had spent decades reading people's emotional states and stress levels. Maya's technique was as sharp as ever, but there was an underlying tension that suggested she was dealing with more than typical teenage social problems. "Social drama can be more dangerous than physical threats," Elena said quietly. "Physical threats are straightforward. Someone wants to hurt you, you defend yourself. Social threats are more complex because they attack your reputation, your relationships, your ability to exist peacefully in your environment." The observation was uncomfortably accurate, and Maya found herself considering whether her current situation might require a different approach than simple avoidance and de-escalation. Elena had always emphasized that martial arts was about more than physical techniques. It was about understanding conflict in all its forms and developing strategies for dealing with various types of threats. "What would you do if avoiding conflict wasn't an option anymore?" Maya asked, trying to frame the question hypothetically while seeking guidance for her actual situation. Elena set down the training pads she had been holding and gave Maya her full attention. The question suggested that her student was facing something more serious than typical high school social dynamics, and Elena's protective instincts were immediately engaged. "Depends on what kind of conflict we're talking about," Elena replied carefully. "If someone is threatening your physical safety, you defend yourself with whatever force is necessary to stop the threat. If someone is threatening your social standing or emotional well-being, you have more options." Maya nodded, but Elena could see that the answer wasn't providing the clarity her student was seeking. The specific nature of Maya's situation was clearly more complex than a simple choice between fighting and avoiding conflict. "The thing about bullies," Elena continued, "is that they usually operate on bluff and intimidation. They pick targets they think are weak because they don't want actual fights. They want easy victories that make them feel powerful. But when their bluff is called, when their target turns out to be stronger than expected, they usually back down pretty quickly." The advice resonated with Maya's assessment of her situation with Jasmine and her crew. They had clearly expected her to break down under pressure, and her failure to do so had frustrated them enough to escalate their efforts. But Elena's point about calling their bluff raised questions about whether revealing her capabilities might actually end the conflict rather than making it worse. "What if calling their bluff means revealing things you've been trying to keep private?" Maya asked. Elena's expression grew more serious as she recognized that Maya was not speaking hypothetically. Her student was facing a genuine dilemma about whether to use her training in a real-world situation, and the decision would have consequences that extended far beyond the immediate conflict. "Then you have to decide what's more important," Elena said. "Your privacy or your safety, your comfort, or your principles. Sometimes the things we want to keep hidden become the things we need to reveal in order to protect ourselves or others. The wisdom was sound, but Maya could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Revealing her martial arts training would fundamentally change her relationship with everyone at Jefferson High. She would no longer be able to maintain her carefully constructed identity as the quiet, harmless student who posed no threat to anyone. "There's something else to consider," Elena added. "When you have skills like yours, you also have responsibilities. If you see someone being hurt and you have the ability to stop it, what's your obligation? If you're being targeted by bullies who will just move on to weaker victims if you don't stand up to them, what's your responsibility to those future victims?" The ethical dimension of Maya's situation was something she hadn't fully considered. Her focus had been on protecting herself and maintaining her own safety. But Elena was raising questions about her responsibility to others who might face similar threats. If Jasmine and her crew were allowed to continue their intimidation tactics without consequences, how many other students would suffer? "I need to think about this," Maya said finally. Elena nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. But remember, Maya, you're not the same scared kid who walked in here 4 years ago. You're strong, you're skilled, and you're smart. Whatever decision you make it from a position of strength, not fear." The conversation stayed with Maya during her bus ride home and through her evening routine. Elena's words had crystallized something that had been building in her mind since the morning's confrontation. The realization that her strategy of invisibility was no longer sustainable, and that she might need to consider alternative approaches to dealing with the threats she faced. The next day, Keisha's investigation began to bear fruit. She had spent hours tracking Maya's movements through a combination of social media analysis, public transportation schedules, and careful observation of her routines. The picture that emerged was of someone whose after-school activities were far more structured and purposeful than her school persona suggested. "She takes the 4:15 bus downtown 3 days a week," Keisha reported to Jasmine and Deshawn during lunch. "Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Always gets off at the same stop. Always walks in the same direction. Whatever she's doing, it's regular and important enough that she never misses it." Jasmine felt a surge of excitement as the pieces began to come together. Maya's confident demeanor, her controlled responses to intimidation, and her regular after-school schedule all pointed toward some kind of structured training or activity that was developing her capabilities in ways that weren't obvious at school. "Did you find out what's in that area?" Jasmine asked. Keisha consulted her notes, which had grown to encompass a detailed map of Maya's movements and a comprehensive list of businesses and organizations in the relevant neighborhood. Her research had been thorough and systematic, revealing patterns that would have been invisible to casual observation. "It's mostly industrial, but there are a few gyms, a community center, and some small businesses. The most interesting one is something called Rodriguez Mixed Martial Arts. It's in an old warehouse building, and they advertise training in boxing, kickboxing, and various martial arts disciplines." The revelation hit all three of them like a physical blow. Mixed martial arts training would explain everything about Maya's behavior. Her confidence, her composure under pressure, her strategic positioning during confrontations, and her apparent lack of fear when faced with physical threats. Deshawn felt his stomach drop as he realized the implications of what they had discovered. He had been planning to escalate their campaign of intimidation into actual physical violence. But the prospect of fighting someone with professional martial arts training changed everything about the risk calculation. "How long has she been training there?" Deshawn asked, his voice carrying none of the confidence that had characterized his earlier threats. Keisha consulted her timeline analysis, cross-referencing Maya's social media history with the gym's business records and her own observations of Maya's behavioral patterns. The research had revealed a transformation that spanned several years and represented a significant investment of time and effort. Based on when her social media posts started getting more disciplined and when her physical appearance began to change, I'd say at least 3 years, maybe 4. This isn't someone who just started taking self-defense classes last month. This is someone who has been seriously training for years. The implications were staggering. Maya Chen, the quiet girl they had dismissed as an easy target, was potentially one of the most dangerous students at Jefferson High. Her apparent vulnerability was not just an act. It was a sophisticated strategy designed to avoid exactly the kind of confrontation they had been planning. Jasmine felt a mixture of rage and grudging respect as she processed the information. Maya had outmaneuvered them completely, maintaining a facade of weakness while developing capabilities that made her effectively untouchable. The morning's confrontation now appeared in a completely different light, as Maya's calm demeanor transformed from mysterious to genuinely threatening. "So what do we do now?" Deshaun asked, his earlier enthusiasm for physical intimidation completely evaporated. Jasmine considered their options, weighing the risks and benefits of various approaches. Direct confrontation was obviously out of the question, but backing down completely would damage her reputation and encourage other students to challenge her authority. She needed a strategy that acknowledged Maya's capabilities, while still maintaining her own position as the dominant force at Jefferson High. "We're going to have to be smarter about this," Jasmine said finally. "Physical intimidation is off the table, but there are other ways to make someone's life difficult. Social isolation, academic sabotage, reputation destruction. She may be able to fight, but she can't fight gossip and social pressure." Keisha nodded, already beginning to formulate plans for a campaign of social warfare that would avoid direct confrontation, while still achieving their goals of establishing dominance and teaching Maya her proper place in the school's hierarchy. But as they plotted their next moves, none of them fully understood that they had already crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Maya Chen had spent years preparing for the possibility that her two worlds might collide, and their investigation had provided her with all the justification she needed to abandon her strategy of invisibility. The revelation of her martial arts training changed everything about the dynamic between them. Maya was no longer the helpless target they had assumed her to be, and they were no longer the unopposed predators who could intimidate anyone with impunity. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, and none of them were prepared for what Maya Chen might do when she finally decided to stop hiding who she really was. The ambush came on a Friday afternoon when the halls of Jefferson High were mostly empty, with most students either heading home or staying for after-school activities. Maya had just finished collecting her weekend homework assignments and was making her way toward the main exit when she realized that the usual flow of student traffic had been mysteriously diverted away from the east stairwell. The stairwell was one of the less frequently used routes between floors, positioned away from the main administrative offices and lacking the natural foot traffic that made other areas of the school safer through constant observation. Maya's heightened awareness immediately recognized the tactical significance of the location, and she understood that the absence of other students was not coincidental. As she approached the stairwell entrance, Maya could see Jasmine Rodriguez positioned at the top of the stairs, with Deshaun Williams blocking the bottom exit and Keisha Thompson stationed at the middle landing. Their positioning was clearly coordinated and designed to prevent escape while ensuring that any confrontation would occur away from potential witnesses or intervention. Maya paused at the entrance, her training automatically assessing the tactical situation while her mind calculated various response options. The confined space of the stairwell would limit her movement options, but would also prevent them from surrounding her completely. The concrete stairs and metal railings could be used as weapons or defensive barriers if necessary. "Maya Chen," Jasmine called out, her voice echoing in the empty stairwell. "We've been waiting for you. We need to finish our conversation from the other day." Maya remained at the entrance, maintaining her distance while keeping all three antagonists in view. Her years of training had taught her that controlling distance and positioning were crucial elements in any confrontation, and she wasn't going to surrender those advantages by entering the confined space where they wanted her. "What conversation?" Maya asked, her voice calm and steady despite the obvious threat. "I thought we had already worked everything out." Keisha laughed from her position on the landing, the sound harsh and unpleasant in the acoustic environment of the stairwell. "Oh, we worked some things out all right. We worked out that you've been lying to everyone about who you really are." Maya felt her pulse quicken slightly as she realized that their investigation had been more successful than she had hoped. The discovery of her martial arts training changed the entire dynamic of their relationship and eliminated many of the de-escalation strategies she had been planning to use. "I don't know what you think you've discovered," Maya said carefully, "but I've never lied to anyone about anything important." Deshaun moved up a few steps from his position at the bottom of the stairwell, his body language aggressive and threatening. "Rodriguez mixed martial arts," he said, letting the words hang in the air like an accusation. 4 years of training, 3 nights a week, under Elena Rodriguez. That sound familiar to you?" Maya's heart sank as she realized the extent of their knowledge. They had not just discovered her training, they had researched it thoroughly enough to know specific details about her instructor and schedule. The careful separation between her two worlds had been completely destroyed. Training in martial arts isn't illegal, Maya said quietly. Lots of people train for fitness and self-discipline. Jasmine began descending the stairs slowly, her movements deliberate and predatory. But most people don't spend 4 years learning how to hurt people and then pretend to be helpless victims when they get confronted at school. Maya recognized that they were trying to reframe the narrative to make her appear deceptive and threatening, rather than acknowledging their own aggressive behavior. The reversal was clever, but fundamentally dishonest, and Maya felt her anger beginning to build beneath her carefully maintained composure. "I never pretended to be a victim," Maya replied. "I just tried to avoid conflicts that didn't need to happen." Keisha moved to block Maya's view of the upper stairwell, completing the tactical formation they had planned. "But conflicts are going to happen whether you want them or not. The question is whether you're going to handle them honestly or keep pretending to be something you're not." Maya realized that they had moved beyond intimidation into the realm of actual confrontation. Their knowledge of her training had eliminated any possibility of peaceful resolution, because they now viewed her as a legitimate threat rather than an easy target. The situation was about to escalate beyond the point where her defensive strategies would be sufficient. "What do you want from me?" Maya asked, still hoping to find a solution that didn't require her to reveal the full extent of her capabilities. Jasmine had reached the bottom of the stairs and was now standing close enough to Maya that the smaller girl could smell her perfume and see the calculation in her eyes. "What I want is for you to stop pretending that you're better than everyone else. What I want is for you to admit that you've been playing games with people who deserved your honesty from the beginning." Maya could see that Jasmine was working herself up to justify whatever action she was planning to take. The moral framework she was constructing painted Maya as the aggressor, and themselves as victims of deception, which would allow them to escalate their response without feeling guilty about attacking someone who appeared defenseless. "I never said I was better than anyone," Maya said, taking a small step backward to maintain distance while keeping all three antagonists in view. "I just wanted to focus on my studies and avoid drama." Deshaun moved closer from behind Jasmine, his presence adding physical intimidation to the psychological pressure they were applying. "But you can't avoid drama forever. Sooner or later, everyone has to show who they really are." Maya's situational awareness told her that the confrontation was reaching a tipping point. The positioning of her three antagonists, their escalating rhetoric, and the isolated location all indicated that they were preparing to move beyond words into physical action. Her years of training had prepared her for this moment, but she still hoped to avoid revealing her full capabilities. "I'm showing you who I really am right now," Maya said. "I'm someone who doesn't want to fight, who wants to resolve conflicts peacefully, and who respects other people enough to try to work things out through conversation." Keisha's voice carried a mocking tone as she responded from her position on the landing. "That's a pretty speech, Maya. But we know you're not the peaceful little flower you pretend to be. We know you've been training to hurt people for years." Maya felt her patience beginning to erode as they continued to mischaracterize her training and motivations. Martial arts had taught her discipline, respect, and self-control, not aggression and violence. Their insistence on framing her education as something sinister revealed more about their own mindset than about her actual character. "Martial arts training is about self-defense and discipline," Maya said, allowing a slight edge to enter her voice. "It's about learning to protect yourself and others when necessary." Jasmine stepped even closer, invading Maya's personal space in a way that was clearly designed to provoke a reaction. "And when do you think it becomes necessary, Maya? When someone calls you out for being fake? When someone challenges your little act?" Maya could feel the situation slipping beyond her control, as Jasmine's proximity and aggressive body language triggered her defensive instincts. Her training had prepared her to recognize the signs of impending violence, and every indicator suggested that physical confrontation was seconds away. "I think it becomes necessary when someone threatens your safety or the safety of others," Maya replied, her voice remaining steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. Deshaun moved to within arm's reach of Maya, his bulk intimidating and his intentions clearly aggressive. "And what if someone just wants to test whether all that training was worth the money your family spent on it?" The threat was unmistakable, and Maya realized that they had decided to force a physical confrontation regardless of her attempts at de-escalation. Her years of careful strategy had failed, and she was now facing the exact situation she had spent so much effort trying to avoid. "You don't want to test that," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a new quality that made all three of her antagonists pause. "Trust me, you really don't want to find out what I've learned." But Jasmine had invested too much energy in this confrontation to back down now, and Maya's warning only seemed to inflame her determination to establish dominance. "Actually, I think we do want to find out. I think it's time for you to show everyone what the quiet little martial artist can really do." Maya could see that peaceful resolution was no longer possible. They had made their decision to escalate the situation into violence, and her only remaining choice was whether to defend herself effectively or allow them to hurt her in order to maintain her cover. The decision was easier than she had expected. "Okay," Maya said simply, her voice taking on the calm, focused tone that Elena had taught her to use when preparing for combat. "But remember that you chose this." The transformation in Maya's demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. Her posture shifted from defensive to balanced. Her hands moved to positions that would allow for rapid response, and her entire presence seemed to expand in ways that filled the narrow stairwell with new energy. Jasmine felt a moment of uncertainty as she recognized that something fundamental had changed in Maya's presentation. The quiet, submissive girl who had been trying to avoid conflict was gone, replaced by someone who radiated confidence and readiness in ways that were genuinely intimidating. But the momentum of the confrontation carried Jasmine forward, and she reached out to grab Maya's shoulder in what was intended to be the opening move of a physical assault, designed to humiliate and dominate her target. Maya's response was swift, precise, and absolutely devastating in its efficiency. She stepped slightly to the side to avoid Jasmine's grabbing motion while simultaneously catching the extended arm and using Jasmine's own momentum to execute a picture-perfect arm drag that sent the larger girl tumbling down several steps before she could react. Deshawn's response was immediate but poorly calculated. He lunged forward with the kind of wild, aggressive movement that characterized untrained fighters, telegraphing his intentions so clearly that Maya had several seconds to prepare her counter. Maya ducked under Deshawn's clumsy swing and delivered a textbook uppercut to his solar plexus that drove all the air from his lungs and doubled him over in pain. Before he could recover, she followed up with a knee strike that caught him in the face and sent him crashing backward into the concrete wall. Keisha, witnessing the sudden destruction of her two more physical companions, made the mistake of trying to flee rather than fighting or surrendering. Her positioning on the middle landing had been tactically sound for intimidation, but it left her trapped when the situation turned violent. Maya bounded up the stairs with the fluid grace that came from years of conditioning and training, catching Keisha before she could reach the upper exit. A simple leg sweep sent the fleeing girl sprawling across the landing, where she lay moaning and holding her injured ankle. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it had completely reversed the power dynamic that had governed their relationship. Maya stood in the center of the stairwell, breathing easily and showing no signs of exertion, while her three antagonists lay scattered around her in various states of pain and humiliation. "Is this what you wanted to see?" Maya asked, her voice carrying none of the submissive quality that had characterized her earlier attempts at de-escalation. "Did you get the demonstration you were looking for?" Jasmine struggled to pull herself up from the stairs where she had landed, her designer clothes torn and her carefully styled hair disheveled. The pain in her arm was significant, but the damage to her pride and reputation was even more devastating. "You can't do this," Jasmine gasped, trying to reassert some authority even from her position of obvious defeat. "You can't just attack people in school. There will be consequences." Maya looked down at the girl who had spent months planning her humiliation and felt no sympathy for her current predicament. "I didn't attack anyone. I defended myself against 3 people who cornered me in an isolated stairwell and threatened me with violence." Deshawn was still struggling to breathe properly, his face showing the beginning of what would become spectacular bruising. His confidence in his own physical capabilities had been shattered along with his nose, and he was beginning to understand the difference between intimidating average students and confronting someone with genuine fighting skills. "This isn't over," he wheezed. but his voice carried none of the conviction that had characterized his earlier threats. Maya crouched down beside him, her proximity making him flinch despite his attempts to maintain a threatening demeanor. "Yes, it is over. It's completely over. You had your chance to leave me alone, and you chose to escalate. Now you know what happens when you force someone to defend themselves." Keisha had managed to sit up against the wall, cradling her injured ankle and looking at Maya with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. Her information-gathering skills had uncovered Maya's training, but she had not anticipated the psychological impact of witnessing those skills in action. "What happens now?" Keisha asked quietly. Maya stood up and looked at each of them in turn, her expression serious but not cruel. "What happens now is that you learn to leave people alone who aren't bothering you. What happens now is that you find better ways to feel powerful than picking on people you think are weaker than you." She paused, making sure she had their full attention before continuing. "And what happens now is that if I ever hear about you targeting anyone else the way you targeted me, we're going to have another conversation. But next time, I won't be trying to de-escalate." The threat was delivered in the same calm, measured tone that Maya had used throughout the confrontation, but its impact was magnified by the demonstration of capability they had just witnessed. None of them doubted that she could and would follow through on her promise if necessary. "You can't tell people what happened here," Jasmine said desperately, recognizing that the story of their defeat would destroy the reputation she had spent years building. Maya considered the request, weighing the benefits of maintaining secrecy against the advantages of allowing the truth to spread throughout the school. Her decision was based on practical rather than vindictive considerations. "I won't tell anyone what happened," Maya said finally. "But I can't control what other people see or what conclusions they draw. If you want to maintain your reputations, you'll need to come up with your own explanations for your injuries." She gathered her backpack and began walking toward the exit, pausing only to deliver one final message. "And if anyone asks me about this, I'll tell them the truth. That 3 people cornered me in a stairwell, threatened me, and learned that some people are more capable of defending themselves than they appear." Maya left the stairwell without looking back, her transformation from victim to victor complete and irreversible. Behind her, Jasmine, Deshawn, and Keisha struggled to process what had just happened, and to begin the difficult work of rebuilding their damaged reputations. The news of the confrontation spread through Jefferson High, with the speed and efficiency that characterized all significant social events in the closed environment of a high school. By Monday morning, everyone knew that something had happened between Maya Chen and Jasmine Rodriguez's crew, even if the specific details remained unclear. The various injuries sustained by Jasmine, Deshawn, and Keisha had required explanations that became increasingly elaborate and contradictory as they tried to maintain their dignity while avoiding the truth. Their stories of accidents and unrelated incidents satisfied no one, and their obvious discomfort when questioned only fueled more speculation. Maya, meanwhile, found herself navigating a completely transformed social environment. Students who had never acknowledged her existence were now greeting her in the hallways, and teachers who had viewed her as just another quiet student were taking new interest in her academic performance and potential. The respect she was receiving was based on genuine achievement and demonstrated capability, which made it far more meaningful than the fear-based deference that Jasmine had previously commanded. Maya had earned her new status through skill and courage, rather than intimidation and aggression. Elena Rodriguez noticed the change in her student immediately when Maya arrived for training that Tuesday evening. Maya's posture was more confident, her movements more fluid, and her overall presence suggested someone who had successfully integrated her martial arts training with her daily life. "Something's different about you," Elena observed as they began their warm-up routine. Maya smiled, feeling free to be completely honest with her instructor for the first time in months. "I had to use what you taught me. Some students at school forced a confrontation, and I couldn't avoid it anymore." Elena paused her stretching and gave Maya her full attention. "How do you feel about that?" Maya considered the question carefully, examining her emotions and reactions to the events of the previous Friday. "I feel like I did what I had to do. I tried everything else first, but they wouldn't let me avoid the conflict. When they forced me to choose between being hurt and defending myself, the choice was easy." Elena nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right way to think about it. You used your skills appropriately, proportionally, and only when necessary. That's what martial arts training is supposed to prepare you for. The validation meant everything to Maya, confirming that her decision had been correct and that her years of training had been worth the investment. She had proven to herself and others that she could handle difficult situations with skill and courage. Maya's parents noticed the change in their daughter as well, though they didn't fully understand its source. She seemed more confident, more willing to speak up about her opinions, and more comfortable in social situations. They attributed the transformation to typical teenage development, and were pleased to see their daughter coming into her own. At Jefferson High, the power dynamics that had governed student interactions for years were fundamentally altered by Maya's demonstration of capability. Other students who had been victims of bullying found new courage to stand up for themselves, while would-be aggressors reconsidered their targets more carefully. Jasmine Rodriguez never regained the unquestioned dominance she had previously enjoyed. Her defeat at Maya's hands had revealed her vulnerability and had encouraged other students to challenge her authority in ways that would have been unthinkable before. She remained influential, but her power was now limited and conditional rather than absolute. Deshaun Williams avoided Maya completely, his broken nose serving as a permanent reminder of the dangers of underestimating opponents. His reputation as an enforcer was destroyed, and he was forced to find new ways to define his identity that didn't depend on physical intimidation. Keisha Thompson redirected her information-gathering skills toward more constructive purposes, recognizing that her previous role as an intelligence broker for Bullies was no longer sustainable in the new social environment Maya had created. Maya herself settled into her new identity as someone who was respected but not feared, capable but not aggressive. She continued her training at Rodriguez MMA while excelling academically and maintaining the part-time job that helped support her family. Her life had found a new balance that integrated all aspects of her identity rather than keeping them carefully separated. The confrontation in the stairwell had ended more than just a bullying situation. It had marked Maya's transition from someone who hid her capabilities to someone who owned them responsibly. She had learned that true strength came not from avoiding conflict at all costs, but from having the skills and courage to handle conflict appropriately when it could not be avoided. Years later, Maya would look back on that Friday afternoon as the moment when she stopped living in fear and started living with confidence. The skills Elena Rodriguez had taught her had protected her when she needed protection, but more importantly, they had given her the self-assurance to become the person she was meant to be. The bullies who had thought they were cornering a helpless victim had instead awakened a force they were completely unprepared to handle. Maya Chen's MMA background had shocked the school, but more than that, it had transformed her from a target into someone who would never be a victim again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.